Hey friends, welcome back to part 3 with Eric, and we're talking now about the upside down world. So when a character has been pulled out, and even you as an author, you've been pulled out of your comfort zone and you're deepening in your spiritual life. Some of the saints will call it, the dark night of the soul. You've left everything that feels safe and normal, and now you're out in the darkness. You're in the upside down, like from Stranger Things, and you're outside of everything that ever felt safe. Why is this an important place, Eric? Why is this an important part of the hero's journey?
Well, it's an essential part in the hero's journey because this is where the hero is tested, right? And this is the book "Save the Cat Writes a Novel" is the one that
It's a great book.
It's a fantastic book by Jessica Brody. And she didn't write this as a spiritual manual, right? But I think there's some real spiritual tidbits that are necessary in our lives and in any character we create, right? And so much of this can be fiction, nonfiction. It really blends. But she's talking about the upside down world as act 2, right, of any sort of kind of 3-act story, if you're going with that structure. So you've been called to adventure. You've responded in the affirmative, right? And now you're following after the space wizard or whatever it is. Now, the thing about the upside down world is it is completely different than the status quo. Right? We spend all this time sinking into our lived experience, et cetera, and now it's all turned on its head. The rules are different. We're being tested and tempted to imagine something different. And our own, if we're testing our characters, right? Our characters, the very stuff that makes them our characters are being kind of put through the grinder here. Are they able to emerge, or how do they handle these tests? Now, what I like about the upside down world, and when I think about it from a spiritual level, and also when we're thinking about the kind of the character in our stories that has to pull our character into our mentor character, right, that pulls our character into the upside down world, Jessica Brody suggests, she says this is necessary, 2 factors, right? This character has to be someone that our protagonist would never have encountered before, right? Until they've committed to this new way of life, right? So the mentor figure has to be representative of the upside down world. What does that mean? The mentor figure has to be representative of the complete opposite of the status quo, which I think is essential, right? Think about our own lives. When do we look for mentors and spiritual guides in people that make us feel comfortable? Or do we look for mentors and spiritual guides, et cetera, right, in people that represent something totally different than what we understand, challenge us, right, to grow? Because the point of this part of any story, fiction or not, is growth, is what do I need to do to continue to become the best version of myself? And the other thing that Jessica Brody says about the mentor is that the mentor figure has to represent part of kind of where our character is going, right? What is the lesson that needs to be learned? And again, I think that's very valuable in our own lives. If we're looking for a spiritual director, if we're looking for, just a spiritual companion of sorts, a guide, how tempting it is to look for somebody that already affirms our status quo, already affirms everything that we want to feel comfortable in, as opposed to challenging us to dream up a better world. Right? We talked earlier. Why do we care about imagination? Why do we care about listening to those deep desires welling up within us? Because God wants something more for us, for the world, right? That great Ignatian term, the magis, more. How can we really bring out God fully in our lives, in our world? That's what the point of the upside down world is that test. Now, in the actual story of it, right? The upside down world is there's highs and lows. It's the kind of the fun and games section, right? The character is meeting new people, being tested, and we experience that too. I think a lot of times we might be in an upside down world as just as people, and not always realize it, right? Until we have time to reflect back and say, oh wow, you know what? That was a totally different experience for me, and yet I really liked it. I learned something important. But I think that's a key for any sort of story. And again, like I do a lot of spiritual writing, right? I dabble in fiction. I want to do more fiction, but I do a lot of spiritual writing. But I think any sort of good spiritual writing has to pull us all into that upside down world, dreaming something different, and challenging people to kind of grapple with what that might mean.
Yeah. So it's not. It's a place where you go to level up. So okay. So there's a question. Then why do we need to effectively level up? Why can't we just sort of gradually, progress through life on like a gentle incline? Why do sometimes, like, it's what we do with that? We don't do that with our characters. Like, that is boring for our characters, even if it's like even if it's like a not very dramatic sort of novel. we're still taking like Pride and Prejudice. Like, sure, there's no swords unless it's got zombies, but the original versions, it's very tense, it's very dramatic. There's a lot of conflict that's going on in there. There's a lot of personal growth, which is the whole point of the thing, is ego versus ego and stuff like that. Why do we need a component like this to our story? Why can't we just like learn from the mentor and then just like get it and move on to the third act? Like, why? So the fun and games part, obviously we like that, but why does it actually have to hurt, basically?
Yeah, I mean, because I think that's life, right? I don't think we live lives that are not full of change, full of hardship. And I think that a life well lived is one that descends into this kind of the necessary chaos of life, and wrestles with injustices and loneliness and depression and all addiction, all of the messiness of life. We enter into it, right? That's what, at least people of faith, were called to enter into the lives of others, and so the world. I think the less vulnerable we make ourselves, the more we shield ourselves off, the more isolated we necessarily become, the more on a high hill we live. And so I think our stories, the stories we tell and we want to tell, and stories that resonate, do so because they strike a chord not just within ourselves, but on something that is inherently human. I think, and I think change and grappling with suffering, and doing it together as community is inherently human. I don't think it's. I sometimes I agree. I think it's a fun thought experiment. You're like, oh, like, why can't I just tell a story where the guy's like, yeah, all right, I agree. You're right. I should be a Jedi. Sign me up. Because that's just not life. And we all, and even if, and I think this is the other thing, right? So maybe your character says, sure, put me in the Jedi Academy. I'm ready to go. Day one, Obi-Wan Kenobi, I'll be your hope. Sure. I think somewhere in that character's story, there is hardship, there is change and challenge. And so, as storytellers, we focus on that because that's what we all feel inherently. But even if we didn't focus on that necessarily, so in that character's story, it's there because that's the experience of being human. And I think too, I'll say one more thing. I'll just keep pulling off books from my shelf here. I'm never going to find the quote, but in Tolkien's essay on fairies, right, on fairy stories, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I take away from that, right, is that what makes a fairy story is that humans are in it, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the fairies. It's the entanglement of humanity with fairy, right? Capital F-A-E-R-I-E, right? Not just like little critters flipping around. And I think that's important because that means that even when we're talking about fantastical stories, as we are, they are necessarily human because they have to inhabit something of the real, right, of our own lives, so that we can see them kind of blown out on the big screen in important ways, and then zoom back into our own kind of very intimate, vulnerable lives.
Yeah, I think stories that I actually watched recently that I thought capture this really, really well. I rewatched Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron recently, and then also Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And then I'm also thinking of Game of Thrones, where this part of the wheel of the cycle of the hero's journey that people go on is you have to put people through these. They leave paradise, these paradisaical situations, like Bilbo and Luke leaving these homes because they quickly realize who I thought I was is not enough for the complexity of the world, and then it's that gap, it's that realization that causes pain. But it's the moment that you do the training montage, you start leveling up, you find the friends, you get the mentor, you start increasing your capacity to meet and deal with the world. And then to right and left, you'll see characters who die and who fall and who can't handle it. And so their lives just sort of stop short in pain. Those are meant to be like cautionary tales for the main character because he has plot armor, he's got to survive through the end. We read stories because we want to see how do different people in a variety of fantastical ways. You don't even have to be human. You can be an ape. You can be the Na'vi, right? It's the same concept of when you're put in like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. Who are you? Who do you become? How do you level up? And you can see that, we're dramatizing stuff in fiction. This immediately applies to our own personal development in our spiritual lives. They may not be elves that are visible, and Na'vi, but the same principles apply of who are you when you're in a situation that you've never prepared for? How do you then start to change and grow and prepare yourself?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think that, again, it goes back to the Ignatian principle of the Magus, of the more. It's not so much that we're not enough, in that God doesn't yet love us until we acquire a certain, the gemstone or something, right? But that we can be more. It's an opportunity. It's an invitation. It's not a scolding or a shameful, oh, you're not enough. It's a man, you've got it in you, and it's only going to grow. And let's get after it. It's that kind of an attitude, and I think that's really important. And I'll say one more thing, just to kind of keep mapping on my spiritual exercises analogy here. In the second week of Ignatius's spiritual exercises, the second week is all about walking with Jesus. You spend a lot of time in the Gospels. Who's Jesus? Jesus is the mentor from the upside down world, helping us to imagine a completely different way of living and interacting with one another and building community. And I think that's really important.